I taught my dog to talk through buttons, and now I wish I hadn't. I taught my dog to talk, not with her voice, but with her paws. I own a 3-year-old Bichon Frise called Gidget. They are a remarkably intelligent breed, despite their yappy image. I taught her from a young age to do tricks and obey commands, and she was a bright and eager student. I always felt she had a lot to say. So, when I saw videos on TikTok and Instagram of dogs who use programmed buttons to indicate their needs, I thought I might try it with Gidget. I bought a pack. Recorded my voice on the buttons. I kept it simple at first. I gave her buttons to make requests and to ask for things. Outside, food, water, treat, play. After she had mastered those, I added more. I gave her options about where she wanted to go, what things she wanted to eat. She soon learned to pair the buttons up. Outside, park, food, chicken. It was amazing to hear her preferences, to know why she whined or barked. As she grew more confident, I added more buttons. These were more philosophical and used concepts rather than nouns and verbs. I wasn't sure Gidget would be able to understand them, but she picked them up so quickly I wished I had introduced them sooner. We discussed the weather, dreams, emotions. She was soon able to tell me if she was happy or sad, tell me she'd had a bad dream, and ask for a particular toy for her playtime. I became obsessed. Her little brain was able to express so much more than I'd ever suspected. I added more buttons. Soon she was able to tell me her mood, ask pertinent questions with the why button, make decisions based on what I suggested. She also liked to look out of the window and tell me what she saw. It was so interesting. Whilst I might look out of the window and see my neighbor carrying groceries from his car, Gidget would watch the same scene and tell me about the bird she had spotted, or stray leaf she had seen caught by the wind. I was able to see the world through her eyes. She'd been using her buttons to talk for over a year before things started to get disturbing. One day, she stopped playing with her favorite toy, looked into a corner, and walked over to her board. Very deliberately, she selected the button for dark. I laughed. It was daytime, and the sunlight was shining into every corner. No dark, I told her. Light. It's daytime. No dark. I used the buttons to reinforce my message. No. Dark. Light. Day. Gidget listened, but turned her little head back to the corner. After a few minutes, she came back to her board. Dark, she said again. I'm afraid I shrugged off her words and the message behind them. I may even have laughed. No dark, I said. Light? Gidget humored me. She was a very clever dog. Sometimes, whilst we played, she would stop and examine a random wall, hover by her word board ready to tell me what she saw. But my previous reaction must have discouraged her. Time and again she would stamp on the button for dark, and I would look at where she looked and deny it. I added more buttons, and with those buttons came more unease. Dark. Stranger, no. Cold. I'd stand where she looked to show her it was okay. She would whine and cry and hit the stranger button. It upset me a lot. After a while, Gidget stopped using her buttons. She regressed. She stopped asking outside and would whine at the door instead. She stopped asking food and would stand by her bowl and cry. I didn't know where I had gone wrong. I stood in the corner she hated more often, trying to understand why she hated it. It was cold there, colder than anywhere else in our home, but very welcoming. I found it soothing for some reason. But the more I stood there, the more she cried. It started to get annoying. It was just a stupid corner. I'm not sure what to do. Update. Gidget has regressed even more. She has started peeing in the house, which is incredibly frustrating. At first I brushed it off, then I took her to the vets. The vet said there was nothing physically wrong with her and said she seemed stressed. She's a dog? What has a dog got to be stressed about? I'm getting sick of cleaning up puddles of pee. I feel like I should punish her. Update 2. Gidget won't come near me now. I hold my hand out to coax her. She turns away. Idiot animal. I remember that I loved her once, but that was before I realized how useless she was. She won't even love me. The main reason I got a dog in the first place. I spend more time in my corner and watch the little fluffy beast cringe in her bed. The bed I bought her that she doesn't deserve. I'm watching her now. I've been staring at her for hours now, and she has done nothing except shake and cry. She used her buttons for the first time in ages earlier. Where? Mum. Mum, bye. Stupid creature. Can't she see I'm right here? Or is it too dark? And I don't want to use her name, but you will know her as Gidget's mum, so I'll call her GM. As for myself, I am a friend who took Gidget away. GM hadn't checked in with our circle of friends for days when I decided to go and see her. We have a group chat we all access daily, but she had been absent from it for too long and hadn't responded to a single message aimed at her. I lived the closest, so I volunteered to go and check up on her. When she answered the door, I was horrified at what I saw. GM is normally a very tidy person who takes great care in her appearance, but when I saw her, she looked terrible. There were vast dark circles under her eyes, and her clothes were covered in stains. She let me in, and as she turned away from me, I noticed that the hair on the back of her head was matted, as if she hadn't brushed it for weeks. Even though her curtains were still drawn at 3 p.m., I could see enough in the dim light to ascertain that her home was as messy as she was. There were dirty plates piled on the floor, stale food congealing on them, and for some reason, she had put a blanket over the mirror above her fireplace. What shocked me more was the state of Gidget, though. It was a running joke in our friend group that GM treated Gidget like her baby. Gidget was completely spoiled and pampered, with regular visits to groomers and an entire wardrobe of little outfits. But the small white scrap I saw cowering in her filthy bed didn't look like the princess I'd come to know and love. Gidget looked like one of those dogs they used in adverts for animal charities. She was trembling when I saw her, but she still managed to wag her tail, giving me a warmer welcome than GM had given, and she scuttled out of her bed, coming towards me in an awkward, crouching gait I'd never seen her use before. I didn't know much about dog body language, but it was clear to me that Gidget was badly frightened of something, or someone. I didn't like to imagine what had been going on, but judging from GM's appearance and the state of her home and beloved pet, it was an understatement to say that something was terribly wrong. I'm afraid I assumed that GM was depressed. It wasn't something she was prone to my knowledge. But there was a first time for everything. I tried to be as upbeat as possible. I didn't mention how awful GM looked, but I did instinctively start to tidy up a little. I didn't know what else to do. I bustled round her flat, picking things up, recounting such news of our other friends' activities I thought she'd like to hear. GM's silence was unsettling, and being around her made the hairs on my arms prickle. It was ridiculous, but I have to admit that I was scared of her. Something was incredibly off. Not just the mess, or the sour smell, or GM's withdrawal. Not even Gidget's cowed attitude, which I probably could have explained, had I not wanted to consider what GM might have put her through. GM has always been, a very sweet person, totally devoted to her dog. I didn't want to think that, in her current state, she might have abused her baby, but I couldn't completely discount it. I felt her behind me as I tidied her kitchen. She stank, a reek like rotten meat, body odor, and old piss. I tried to keep up my chatter so she wouldn't know something was wrong, and for some reason it was very important she didn't know that something was wrong. She was like a dark shadow hanging over me. Looming, in fact. At one point, I turned and saw a big steak knife lying unattended and put it in the dishwasher just for something to do, so I wouldn't have to make eye contact. Now I was there, I regretted coming. It made me sick to my stomach to be in her presence. The feeling of unease I'd felt upon entering had only gotten worse. I looked around her flat for an excuse to do something else and saw a little puddle on the hardwood floor. It looked very much like Gidget had peed there. I hoped it had been Gidget and not GM. I made my way to the mop, but GM stopped me. She was very distressed, her face right up to mine, and I could smell her breath. It was sweet with rot, thick with something meaty. She told me she didn't want me to do anything else, not with her voice but with her eyes. And despite the danger I felt coming off her in waves as strong as her body odor, I couldn't just leave. I told her I wanted to help her, or something like that. I was in no fit state to form a coherent argument. "You can do something for me," she said. And it was then I realized it was the first time she had spoken since I'd entered her flat. Her voice sounded strange, although strange isn't a deep enough word to describe it. It was guttural and thick, as though she was holding phlegm in the back of her throat, and the words were bubbling through. It was the voice an open grave would have if it could speak. The voice of a basement door, covered with cobwebs, held ajar with a spike of bone as a doorstop. I asked her what she wanted me to do for her, and her eyes flickered then. Maybe it was just the poor lighting, but for a moment it looked as though she had a second set of eyelids beneath her usual ones, like a crocodile. Almost transparent, but with a smoky glaze to them. One corner of her mouth twitched as if she wanted to smile, but then her face became serious again. Her lips moved without sound, and now her eyes bulged a little as she huffed rancid breath against my skin. There was a struggle going on inside my friend, and I hoped she was winning. "Take Gidget," she said, coughing the words out as if they hurt her. She was holding my arm so tightly it hurt, pinching the nerve by my elbow until I felt my arm go numb to the shoulder. I can't remember what else was said. All I know is I wanted to leave, and quickly. And I wanted to take Gidget with me. I packed what I could as quickly as I could. The most important things like Gidget's, bowls and food and bed, and the other useful stuff like her toys and leash and harness, along with some of her cute little coats. I was ready to go when GM, sitting on her couch and watching me with a blank expression, urged me to take Gidget's talking board too. I hadn't even thought of it, but it made sense. I'd always been enthralled by Gidget's board and the way she communicated. It would be fun. I grappled everything into bags, breaking the board down so I could assemble it again at my house, and made my exit. Walking out of the front door made me feel as though I'd escaped, though from what I couldn't tell you. It was just such a relief. Gidget stopped to look back before the door swung closed behind us, but I didn't. I was focused on getting out. Every step I took to get away from GM was lighter than the one before. I never thought I would shirk my duties to a friend, that I'd be so eager to leave someone in distress, but I knew GM couldn't be talked down, and plied with ice cream and chick flicks to get her out of her mood. My shoulder, which had felt many tears upon it over the years, did not want to accommodate GM right now. Gidget relaxed somewhat once she was in my car, but she still looked over her shoulder as I drove away. I couldn't understand her urge to look. Personally, I didn't ever want to see that building again. I've read about women who have been kept prisoner in places for years at a time. Colleen Stan, Elizabeth Fritzl, Michelle Knight. It was a fascination of mine. I could only imagine how those women would have felt looking at the houses they'd been kept in after their escape. And I had nothing to compare to their ordeal. But to look back at GM's building was unthinkable. I couldn't do it. Back at my house, I took stock of Gidget's condition properly. She was bedraggled and somehow shrunk into herself, but there was nothing that a bath and a decent meal couldn't sort out. Gidget had been through a tough time, but I couldn't see signs of abuse, only short-term neglect. I bathed her, both us getting soaked amongst the bubbles of her shampoo, and toweled her dry in front of the fireplace. She seemed a lot perkier than she had at her own home, and even accepted some of her expensive food, though not as much as I'd hoped. It was probably more for my benefit than hers that I wrapped her in a blanket and cuddled her on my lap, but it did both of us good, and after a couple of hours of snuggles, she was confident enough to wriggle from my grasp and approach the bag that held her board. I'd dismantled it in a hurry and hadn't reassembled it yet, but she sniffed at the corner of the board sticking out and looked at me expectantly. A very real part of me did not want to put her board together again. I didn't want to know what she wanted to tell me, but the little frill of her tail twitched, and her fluffy cheeks puffed out to express a single polite woof. I couldn't deny her. I laid the board out, clicking the panels into place, and repositioned any loose buttons before returning to my chair and turning on the TV. Gidget stood by her board for a while, considering her options, and I half-watched her, hoping she would only ask for a treat. But Gidget had more serious stuff in mind. "Mum, gone." She pressed the buttons with her little paw, then gazed at me, trying to ascertain whether I'd registered her comment. I smiled a false smile that hurt my face, and replied too brightly, "Yes, Mum gone, at Auntie X's house now." I didn't know it was possible for a dog to look frustrated, but she was patient with me. She examined her board again, thinking, then selected some more buttons. Mum, dark, stranger, gone. I felt hot, like Gidget's words had turned the fire up a notch. I pretended I hadn't heard the buttons and concentrated on the voice. The one on TV, not the one asking to get into my head. Stranger. Gidget didn't just press the button, she stamped on it, emitting a little aggravated snort. Dark, stranger, bye, Mum. A glance at me then. Help, Mum, bye, stranger. I pretended I didn't know what she meant. I laughed, a sound that was jagged and false. Bedtime now, I told her, turning off the TV. Do you want to sleep with Auntie X? Gidget regarded me for a long time, then appeared to give the dog version of a shrug. She sighed and plodded towards my bedroom, not looking at me. I'd let her down, but it appeared Gidget was a lot braver than I am. I didn't sleep well. Gidget's warm little body was a comfort next to me, but my dreams were full of troubling, indistinct images. I tossed and turned all night, waking often, and every time I woke, I would stare at the vague rectangle of my bedroom door, expecting it to be open. I dreamed that someone was leaning over me, someone with negative intent, someone with breath that was scalding hot yet made frost form on my face. More than once, I woke up to find out I had pulled either the covers or my own pillow over my head, as though I was hiding from something. My sleep that night was ragged and sparse, and when the sun finally rose, I was wearier than when I had gone to bed. I didn't want to experience a night like that again. I made coffee in the gray pre-dawn light. I didn't even think about going back to bed. Gidget joined me, looking as tired as I felt. Her perfect little white curls were scruffy and flat, her ears droopy. She didn't look at me for comfort as I looked at her, but went straight to her board and yawned before pressing her buttons. Help, Mum, bye, stranger. She flopped down onto the floor by her board, exhausted. I didn't know what to say. I didn't have the energy. I sat down with my coffee and stared at the blank TV. I thought that I should call some of our friends, but it was far too early. Everyone would be asleep. Everyone except whoever it was ringing my doorbell. And I thought it might be the postman, though he had never called so early. Barely awake, I put my cup down and heaved myself out of my chair. Gidget was up and alert all of a sudden, staring at the door, her little body rigid with a slight tremor running down her spine. No. She stepped on the button as I walked towards the door. It's okay, Gidget, I told her, still sleepy. Auntie X, get door. No, 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 no. She pummeled it repeatedly, ears flapping as she bounced. Stranger, no. I looked through the spy hole in my door. It gave me a fish-eye lens view of everything outside. Someone was standing slightly to the left of my door, just out of sight. I lifted my hand to release the deadbolt, and again Gidget stamped on the no button. The imperative behind the robotic voice made me pause. It was a recorded version of GM's voice, made unnatural by the repetition, and the more Gidget stamped on it, the more desperate it sounded. I squinted through the peephole again. I could see a shoulder and most of an arm. Who is it? I asked. Never had I asked for identification before. The figure on my step moved, came into view. It was GM, looking as scruffy as she had before. She was smiling, an expression that looked strange on her crusty face, and one arm was behind her back. The other arm reached up, the attached hand ringing the doorbell again. It's me, X, she said, sounding exactly how she should, her voice normal now. I'm feeling better. I've come to get Gidget. It should have been a relief. GM sounded fine, and I was already exhausted from looking after Gidget. But I did take my hand down from the deadbolt. Gidget was frantic now, pouncing on her buttons just out of my line of vision. GM's metallic voice spoke to me, over and over. No. Stranger. No. Mum. Stranger. Dark. No. I sighed. Put my head against the cool wood of my front door. I can't let you in, GM, I said. I don't know why, but I can't. Something thumped against the outside of the door, right where my head was placed. I moved then, stepped away, just a split second before the point of a knife appeared, piercing the wood. I stared at it without comprehension, and watched as it disappeared again. Open the door, X, said the voice from the other side. No. I couldn't tell if it was me or the voice from Gidget's board who spoke, but it didn't matter. The thing on my porch screamed, and I heard rapid footsteps. When I looked outside again, GM was gone. Swaying on my feet, I wondered if I had locked the back door before going to bed last night. I usually did. I'm hoping I did. But I did hear a weird squeal just now that sounded like the old hinges on my back door opening. It might just be my imagination. But for now, I am crouched in my bedroom, Gidget close by my knee, and her entire attention is trained on my bedroom door. I feel like I should call the police, but I also feel like writing this down is more important. Strange. I can hear noises in my house. What should I do? I mean, it's only my friend out there, if anything. This is not the end, but it would be way too long, so we'll upload a part 2 of this story. If you want to follow along, subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow will be another day. Until then, see y'all and have a great day or night.